Hello again. Today's story is about being Lady of the Manor. When Julia was young and her family lived on the small holding in the middle of the Herefordshire countryside, there was not much money. People didn't go out to the shops to buy new things all the time as they do now. There was no television, no fridge, no washing machine, no vacuum cleaner, no car. Julia didn't think of her family as poor, even though they had no money to buy anything. In school, she learned about the child labour of the Victorian age, when some children had to work in the cotton mills from morning till night. Those children didn't even go to school. They worked for up to 18 hours a day, and Julia couldn't understand how anybody could keep going for so long. As Julia and her sisters became teenagers, their family had a bit more money. They even had 2 cars, and their parents sometimes took the family on outings to interesting places. Their daddy liked to take them rambling in the Welsh mountains, and their mummy liked to take them to visit stately homes. A stately home is a big country residence, like a mansion or a palace. They were built hundreds of years ago for very rich people to live in. Then the very rich people ran out of money and had to open their stately homes to the public. And people were allowed to walk around the rooms and see all the fine furniture and other objects that the rich people had accumulated. Julia liked to imagine what it would be like to be a rich man's wife, living in splendour, with servants to do the work, and so many rooms you could invite lots of people to stay and have parties and balls. She yearned to be Lady of the Manor. She didn't think much about where the money would come from. When Julia was grown up, she married a good man called Chris. They had enough money to be comfortable, but not enough to live in a mansion. Then they got divorced and Julia married another good man, also called Chris. Chris was a common name, you see. Julia and Chris number 2 found that they both had an interest in running a guest house or hotel. They borrowed an enormous amount of money and bought a decrepit hotel in a remote seaside town called Eastbourne. They worked hard to make the hotel look nice and to entertain coach parties and holiday makers with their hospitality. Julia realised that at last she had fulfilled her ambition of being Lady of the Manor, because now she had a large number of bedrooms and it was like a house party, having people come to stay. The waiting staff and the chambermaids were like the servants who made everything run smoothly. But Julia discovered that things didn't just happen by themselves. She had to always make sure the staff were doing the work properly, and then they would leave and she had to find more staff and train them again. And sometimes the customers would complain and have to be placated. People are not easy to work with. Julia realised that the ladies of the manor in the olden days must have had similar difficulties. But at least they didn't have to muck in with the cooking and cleaning and get up early and go to bed late. Julia sometimes worked for 18 hours a day, and that helped her to understand what it was like for the Victorian children in the cotton mills. Because they had borrowed a huge amount of money to buy the hotel, and because Eastbourne was no longer a tourist hotspot, Julia and Chris had to be very careful with money. Julia was good at this because of having grown up with no money, but it was still rather disappointing having to make do with broken beds and stained carpets until more money came in and the books were balanced. Chris and Julia found that they were not going to make their fortunes by running a hotel. In fact, they were more likely to work themselves into an early grave. So they decided to sell the hotel and look for other things to do that were no doubt equally foolish but less stressful.